All right, everybody, I'm going to get started here. Thanks for joining us today on understanding cultural competency to deliver great customer service in schools. I'm happy to announce that our presenter today is going to be Barbara M. Hunter, APR. She is the President and CEO of Hunter Communications, LLC in Alexandria, Virginia. She's the former Communications Officer for Fairfax County Schools and Alexandria City Schools, both in Northern Virginia. She served as the Mideast Region Vice President for NSPRA, as well as the past president of NSPRA's Chesapeake chapter. She's also co-authored NSPRA's Rubrics of Practice and Suggested Measures, and she's earned dozens of awards, including the Silver Anvil Award of Excellence for her work on changing school start times. Wow, what a resume. We're so happy to have you here today, Barbara. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So let's get started. First of all, I really want to thank Peach Jar for the opportunity to present to the folks who are on this webinar today. I know you all have out there in school districts, I know you have a really tough job, and I really admire all the work that you're doing on behalf of our students and families. So thank you so much to both you and to Peach Jar. So you've probably heard this term cultural competency somewhere along the way, something about it somewhere, but you may not really be sure about how it applies to school communications. So we're going to learn about that all today. You know, when I started working on developing this session, I presented this at NSPRA last year in Chicago. I really had no idea how timely this topic would be. Recent national and world events have catapulted racial, ethnic, gender, and religious differences and misunderstandings to center stage, right? We can't turn on the news without hearing of violence inflicted on a group of individuals based on who they are culturally or what they represent culturally. And personally, I'm deeply troubled by what I'm seeing on the news and what is playing out in our streets, in our bars, in our movie theaters and restaurants all around the world, not just here in the United States. But I'm hopeful that these kind of conversations and the thoughts that you're going to have today is part of the solution. And so as we go through this presentation in the next 30 to 40 minutes, I invite you to reflect on what you're learning and how you may apply this to what's happening in your school district. So I also want to say that this topic can make people sometimes feel uncomfortable because we're going to get a little deep later in the webinar about your biases, because we all have them, and how you might have acquired those, and I'm going to be honest about my experiences, but that's really okay to be uncomfortable, because it's only when we're at the edge of our comfort zone can we grow and explore new ways of thinking and approaching a problem. So my goal here is to make each of you think a little different about cultural awareness and cultural differences by the time you leave this webinar, and also understand how you can apply this learning to what's happening in your school district, particularly in delivering great customer service. So let's get started. And I'm going to move them. There we go. So we have a hashtag if you are so inclined to join the conversation on Twitter, hashtag cultural comp. I used that at my NSPRA seminar last summer, and a few people joined in, so feel free if you'd like to. And I wanted to share sort of some objectives from this webinar. So hopefully by the end you will understand the meaning of culture, cultural displays and behaviors, identify the cultural groups to which you belong, and those are unique to you. Understand the meaning of cultural competency and why it's important in delivering great customer service to every single customer who comes into your schools or central office. And as I mentioned, understand bias from a personal perspective and how it's developed, and how to become more aware of your own biases. I'm going to share how your district can become culturally competent, and also the 5 universal needs of all customers, and then a few tips of communicating with limited English speakers. Now, after the presentation, I understand we're going to have some Q&A opportunity. So I look forward to hearing your comments and your questions at that time. So let's get started. A little bit, what is culture? So it's we have to go to our definitions just to put a framework around culture. And I like, it's defined differently in different places, but I really like this definition. And it is a pattern of human behavior that includes thoughts, communications, languages, practices, beliefs, values, customs, courtesies, rituals, manners of interacting, roles, relationships, and expected behaviors of a racial, ethnic, religious, or social group, right? So I know that's a lot there, but it sort of is who we are. So if you saw me, I am a middle-aged white woman, and so you may wonder what I know about cultural competency, which is a very fair question. So let me just share a little bit about myself. I grew up in a small town in central Maryland with little exposure to minorities. We had few black students in our schools and virtually no Hispanic families anywhere in town. The most exotic minority in our town seemed to be a couple of Jewish families who celebrated this strange thing called Passover. Um, and the most exotic restaurant we had in town was called Angelo's, which was an Italian restaurant where we rarely ate because we had little money to spend on dining out because both of my parents work in the school system. So this is sort of my framework of where I grew up. And so life went on in that little town until I became an adult, and then I moved to Washington, D.C., where I was literally stunned at the endless diversity of people, cultures, foods, holidays, dress, and religions. And I embraced all that diversity with open arms. And I have to say, much to my parents' anxiety. You see, they were not very comfortable with all that diversity. In fact, I'll share with you later, my family really held some pretty strong biases against that diversity. So later, as Ria mentioned, I worked as a chief communications officer in 2 districts where diversity was the majority. In both of these districts, we had children from literally every country in the world and speaking as many languages as there are in the world. And in the city of Alexandria, our high school, which was T.C. Williams High School, which you may recall from the movie of about a decade or so ago, was launched into history with the Remember the Titans. This school, T.C. Williams, had a hall of flags representing the nations of their students, and it was literally a stunning display of the world and a constant reminder of the diversity that the school welcomed and embraced. So the point of this story is that even though I welcomed diversity in its many forms once I became an adult, I had to truly get comfortable with the many cultures that we served in our school so I could do my job in the most effective way, hence developing my own cultural competency. And some of you may have similar experiences or very different experiences. And we all approach our world around us in a very unique way, from our own way. So when we think about what is culture, we just went through this definition. There are outward signs of culture, such as clothing, for example, a sari. Language spoken clearly is an indicator of culture, or attending a place of worship on a particular day. However, cultural indicators may not be so obvious. And for example, such as relationships between men and women, or beliefs, or such as how to raise children. So, for example, in some cultures, men expect women to walk behind them as a sign of respect. And in other cultures, parents believe that children should be seen and not heard. So what's beautiful about this diversity is it's all at your doorstep in schools. You deal with diversity day in and day out, and so does your front office staff, your teachers, your principals. Everybody who works in the school system is interpreting diversity in their own way. So, if you've traveled outside the U.S. at all, this is a really nice depiction of what we're talking about. There are many examples of how it feels to be immersed in a different culture, right? So think of, if you've traveled outside the U.S., how that feels to be totally immersed in and literally a foreigner. And one example I love is when Westerners first get to many Asian countries. If you've traveled to an Asian country, you'll know what I'm about to say. There's endless honking of car horns, and it seems like from our American perspective, like everyone has road rage because they honk their horns all the time on the road. But it doesn't mean the same thing as it does when people do it here, where it usually means like, move out of my way, idiot, or what in the world are you thinking, fool? But on the contrary, many Asian countries like Thailand and Indonesia, and definitely India, it's simply their way of indicating they're doing something. They're like turning or passing you. It's their way of communicating. It's kind of loud way of communicating, but it's actually an important part of second-by-second communication on the road. So our customers in schools, represent many different cultures and nationalities, which we just mentioned, and that can make for some interesting interactions. So, for example, there was an Asian gentleman who was a school bus driver in one of the districts where I worked, and he was in the middle of his afternoon bus route getting kids home after school. And the dispatcher called him on the radio, and he said, "Come in, Mr. Lee." And she didn't hear anything from him. So she started to wonder, about his whereabouts. But about 5 minutes later, he showed up at the bus barn in his bus with all the students still on the bus because she said, "Come in, Mr. Lee." So that's really a beautiful example of how we have strange idiomatic expressions here in the U.S. and with English, like saying, "That's a hot potato," right? Or "We're going back to the drawing board," or "The ball is in your court," or "You're barking up the wrong tree," right? Like many of us are used to these expressions, but imagine someone who doesn't speak English well trying to visualize that, right? So we have to be careful in our use of language and expressions when we're working with customers who are not proficient English speakers. And sometimes we're not always cognizant of that. So let's talk quickly about who our customers are in schools. Well, we can rattle them off. Parents, students, grandparents, our coworkers certainly are customers, community members, the superintendent, school board members, vendors, literally anyone who walks through the door or makes contact with us on the phone or via email. So that's just kind of a reminder of who our customers are. So we're all cultural beings, and because we have a shared history, values, and patterns of behavior that are aligned with the groups we belong to. We're really humans on this planet, and that means we're part of many, many cultural groups. So by definition, a culture is a group of people identified by their shared history, values, and patterns of behavior. So everything you believe as an individual and everything you do enables you to identify with people who are like you and distinguishes you from people who are different from you. And we tend to gravitate toward people who are like us generally, and can make for some discomfort when we deal with people who are very different from us. So here's a little exercise. If you have a pen and paper in front of you, that would be terrific. If you don't, no worries. We're gonna just take a few seconds to think about how you identify yourself. So this exercise, you're gonna write your name in the middle of the circle here, and we're gonna list 4 words to describe a group to which you belong. And let me show you what mine looks like. So this is me in the middle, Barbara Hunter, and I'm adoptive mother. I adopted 2 children from Russia when they were 1 and 2 years old. I'm happy to say they're fully launched and succeeding out in the world. I live on the East Coast, so I see things. I'm probably very different from people who live on the West Coast in terms of perhaps how I approach life. We tend to be a little bit more frenetic here in the Washington, D.C. area. I'm white. It's the skin I'm in, and I've had a very solid middle class set of experiences growing up, and I'm a baby boomer, and that means really that I was influenced by suburbia, television, Vietnam, Watergate, drugs, and rock and roll. Influenced by the culture, not actually drugs. I just want to clarify that. So, it's a really interesting. These are my, four primary, I believe, cultural groups. So let's take a minute and think about how you identify yourself. Name in the middle circle and list 4 words to describe a group to which you belong. And you may want to share this later as we're in our Q&A discussion. And remember, some of these are outward, such as my being white, or or inward, such as my being an adoptive mother. You really wouldn't know that if you just met me on the street. And I would guess that as we're completing this this little exercise, that we share many similarities, even though we may be different in other ways. So you may want to have this conversation with your senior staff or with your team. If you work with a team of folks in your school district, in the communications office, it's a great kind of icebreaker too, to discuss who you are and what groups you belong to. So what is cultural competency? Well, there are many definitions, again, like culture, and descriptions that range really from the very complex to the very simple, but I like this one because it provides us a good understanding of what cultural competency is. So pardon me while I read it to you, but I think it's really important to have this sink in. So it's really the process by which individuals and systems respond respectively and effectively to people of all cultures, languages, classes, races, ethnic backgrounds, religions, and other diversity factors in a manner, and this is key, that recognizes, affirms, and values the worth of individuals, families, and communities, and protects and preserves the dignity of each, right? So I want to make sure cultural competency, you understand, it's not political correctness, okay, in which you mask your feelings or you hold your tongue not to offend somebody. Rather, cultural competency is using our knowledge and sensitivity and awareness to effectively operate in cultures or with cultures different from your own. It's really about truly respecting and honoring the differences among us. So why is cultural competency important in delivering great customer service? Well, there are several reasons. First, the increasing diversity in this nation that we've been talking about throughout this webinar and world requires that we learn to work together in harmony. I'm a big reader of Time magazine, and there's a writer in there, columnist. His name is Scott London, and he had a really interesting reflection on the tension of diversity here in the United States. And this is what he said. He said, quote, "Our founding fathers captured this tension in our national motto, E pluribus unum, which means from the many, one. And it's the great paradox of America. What we have in common is diversity." He goes on to say, when the founders laid out America's first principles 200 years ago, they took inspiration from the Iroquois Indian Confederacy, which modeled this principle of unity in diversity by retaining their individuality while at the same time belonging to a common network in the name of progress and mutual protection, end quote. So he goes on to argue that the hybridization, this is what he calls it, of America is a source of great promise. And I believe that myself, and I believe our school systems are perfectly poised to help people understand that as well. He goes on to say the future belongs to the person who straddles many different worlds and can help explain them to each other. And really, isn't that what we do every day as school communicators? And second, cultural roles and differences can be easily misunderstood and misinterpreted, which can lead to a breakdown in communication. And as we know, when communication breaks down, then so does customer service. So For example, how can we truly know what the customer needs if we can't or won't communicate clearly with them? And I love this little illustration. This is one gesture, and it means three completely different things depending on the country you're in, right? Um, so it's just an example of how communication, this gesture, can be misunderstood. Third, another reason why cultural competency is important in delivering great customer service is that we have to be able to clearly identify the needs and understand the behaviors of our many diverse customers in public schools. Sometimes these behaviors are very different from what we expect within our own culture. So I'll give you an example. For example, in some cultures, a person does not make eye contact with someone in authority as a sign of their respect. But in other cultures, not making eye contact is a sign of disrespect. So because we serve the public, we need to make sure that all feel welcome no matter how different their culture may be. And finally, cultural competency is critical in building relationships, especially with the students we serve. And, you know, research shows, I think you're familiar with this research, that students do their best cognitively and emotionally when they know they're liked, appreciated, and part of a caring community. So the bottom line here is that cultural competence has nothing to do with liking or disliking a particular culture. It's about truly being effective in your interactions with your customers. Good customer service, after all, is all about being effective with your customers and understanding their needs. So let's move a little deeper into this topic by discussing what is bias. Okay, so a bias is a rigid positive or negative conscious or unconscious belief about the nature, character, and abilities of an individual based on the group to which the person belongs. And I love this little cartoon. He says, define bias, and his friend says, a careful review of the facts, which results in any viewpoint other than my own. And I know we're not like that, but we may know people who may exhibit this kind of sentiment. But this is the most important thing. We all have biases because we are human. We cannot avoid it as much as we would like to think we can. We all have them. So I'm going to share with you one of mine. I'm going to put myself out here. So I admit I have a very strong negative reaction whenever I'm on a tech support call. And I seem to be on those a lot because I don't have a tech support person in my office. And when I'm on a call like that and I get connected to someone whose nationality is Indian, meaning subcontinent Indian, it's not that I don't think they know what they're doing. I just have a very, very difficult time understanding their speech pattern, which I find very annoying and frustrating. And already I'm already in a bad mood because I need tech support and I have to call somewhere, to get it. And then second, when this happens, I'm even more annoyed and frustrated. So I often ask to be connected to someone else, another tech support person, which then annoys the tech support person. So it's really, really not a pleasant situation for me. And here are some other examples of biases that are pretty common. All people over 50 are bad at understanding and using technology. I guess that's why I have to call tech support. Another one is most kids these days use drugs. All Asians are really good at math. And people in wheelchairs need extra assistance. These are pretty common biases. So what is common about these statements? Well, they're generalizations of stereotypes that many of us buy into without much thought or reflection. So you may want to think about a bias that has popped up in your head as as we're talking about this. But we're going to go through a little exercise here, and I'm going to ask you to do something that may be a little uncomfortable, a little bit outside your comfort zone, but it's really an opportunity for you to recognize your own biases, both positive and negative, because remember, the biases can be positive, negative, or neutral. So you will not have to share what you think with anyone as we go through this exercise. This is purely for your own private reflection. So the next few slides, I'm going to go through a series of photos on the screen, and I want you to mentally note whether you have a positive reaction or a negative reaction to each of the photos. Really don't overthink this. This is just about your first reaction, okay? So here we go. We have about 10 slides to go through, and I'm going to pause just a few seconds. Just make a mental note, positive or negative. Okay, this one I put in for comic relief. Yeah, this is just literally for comic relief. So, okay, reflections. Now, I want you to close your eyes and think of a positive image you just saw on the screen, okay? And I want you to reflect, why was it positive to you? Was it because that person looked like you? You associated something positive with that person, that image? Okay, now think of a negative image you saw on the screen, something that you reacted negatively to, and reflect. Why? Why was it negative to you? Was that person very different? Had you not ever had an experience with that the person or what that person represented? Okay, if you had your eyes closed, you can open your eyes now. So biases can create all kinds of problems in our understanding of each other. So honestly, most fundamentally, they can keep us from seeing each other accurately. And therefore, it's preventing us from being able to treat people with the kind of respect and dignity that they deserve. Biases can certainly prevent us from providing the best in customer service. So let's talk about how we acquire biases. They often develop in our childhood based on what we hear and see from others, especially our parents and other family members. My grandmother, for example, harbored very negative feelings toward people of Japanese descent because she lived through World War II. She had a very visceral reaction to anyone of Japanese descent. And she shared that because she felt, comfortable doing so with her grandchildren. And when we think about it, television and movies often play a strong role for perpetuating bias in terms of who they cast as villains or heroes or how women are portrayed. The media, as we know in our business, is an enormous force in how we form our opinions. And certainly coverage of news events, particularly over the last 6 months or a year, can cast a bias toward a group of individuals, such as immigrants. And I know that we all are dealing with this in our own school districts. That would be like another fabulous webinar to talk about the fear factor that immigrants are truly feeling, and how they're changing their behavior in terms of not reporting crime, not showing up to school, and in other ways. So thank you for taking time to have private reflection into your biases. I hope that was a little bit revealing. So here we have how we develop biases. We talked about, our family. We've talked about media. Touched on politics. Religion is a huge factor in how we develop our opinions and attitudes about the people we interact with. Certainly our community. My story was I grew up in a very small town with literally no interaction with minorities, and so that formed a lot of people's opinions about who minorities might be and what they might represent. Teachers are a huge influence on children and their opinions. And of course, our physical environment as well, how we grew up, the homes in which we grew up, and peers, of course. So how do we move forward? So, you know, we already have, I think, everyone who's listening actively and participating in this webinar, because we've allowed ourselves a safe space today to recognize our biases. So congratulations. And the next step is to gain a deeper understanding of how we acquired them, many of which we learned in childhood. Um, at NSPRA, I had people share about, with their shoulder partner, about, you know, what your childhood was like, what I learned as a child. But we don't have that opportunity to do that here. But what I'm going to walk you through, and you may want to take this on again as your communications team or your senior staff or another light group, is this next activity, what I learned as a child. And so these are really powerful questions to ponder. And it would be great if you had a facilitator to walk you through this, but you know, you can also, as I said, you know, suggest form a team and have discussions among yourselves in your workplace or with your friends. So where did you grow up? That's a big question. I shared with you my experience, and certainly that makes a difference about where you grew up in your home life. What other cultural groups, identities, and practice did you encounter? Okay. So, for example, I shared I did not really have a lot of interaction with different cultural groups. And then what messages were you given about people who were different, right? And that's from family, from peers, the media, and others. And then finally, how has your background experiences influenced your perceptions of other cultures that you encounter? So again, these are terrific questions to ponder when you have some time. As you start to learn more about cultural competency and how you can help your school district start to address cultural competency and delivering great customer service. So let's go there. How can your district become culturally competent? Well, these are really the 5 universal needs of all customers that really transcend skin color, religious background, ethnicity, dress, language, right? These really transcend all of these. First of all customers, no matter what their backgrounds, have a need to feel welcomed by school employees into their school or central office. So how do we do that? Okay, this sounds simple, but with a smile and a greeting that recognizes their presence. Now, how often have we walked into schools or our school offices and have been greeted, or not at all, have been ignored, you know, or greeted with kind of a sullen front office staff? I hope that's few and far between, but my experience in working with districts around the country, it happens more often than we'd like to see. So that's really the first universal need of our customers, is to feel welcomed. And think about your own customer, how you like to be treated as a customer. This is really no different. Be able to understand. This is the second universal need. Is really to be understood. And you know, 93% of communication is nonverbal. So it's important that we observe closely the nonverbal cues of our customer and not make assumptions about the meaning of them. These cues include facial expressions, gestures, body positions, such as arms crossed, right? Often we think of that as a defensive posture. And contact, handshaking, kissing, eye contact. Because we sometimes misinterpret these nonverbal cues because we apply our own cultural meaning to them. So, for example, like in some cultures in Morocco, closer distances or contact is more prevalent. For example, casual male friends hold hands. Males greet each other with kisses instead of handshakes. And males are more likely to put their arms around each other to demonstrate friendship. So imagine the discomfort if you're talking with someone from Morocco in your school district and that person is coming closer and closer to you because we live in an American culture, and generally we do not like our space invaded, right? Um, it's interesting. Researchers have identified 4 categories of space preferred in the American culture. And if you're in a public space, we'd like 12 feet or more from the person generally that we're talking to. Our social space is about 4 to 12 feet. Personal space is about 18 inches to 4 feet. And then intimate is actual contact to 18 inches. So think about that when you deal with, when you're talking to someone from a different culture, and if they start to lean in, understand that they're applying their cultural norms to that situation. The third universal need of all customers is empathy. And empathy is the ability to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. As we discussed, every customer seeks to be understood and their needs acknowledged and met. So a parent from another culture may be very uncomfortable in a U.S. school setting based on his or her own experiences in their native country. We struggle with that when we're trying to engage parents, right, to try and get them into the schools. Well, maybe they didn't really have a very positive experience in their own country before they came to this country. But then on the other hand, a parent may have such respect for school authority that they surrender all decisions to teachers and administrators. So they don't get engaged because they trust. They think everything is fine. This teachers and principals are doing their job, so there's no need for them to get involved. So it's important that we empathize with our customers' needs and preferences and allow them to retain their dignity, because really empathizing and retaining dignity is a third universal need. The fourth one is listening. And of all the ones we've been talking about, perhaps listening is the most important behavior we need to work on. So if we don't truly listen to our customers, we really won't be able to give them what they need, which results in their frustration. Think about when you go into a store or you're expecting a particular service. When you're not listened to, it becomes very frustrating, right? So we often do not pay enough attention to someone who's talking to us, and it's especially important when we're working with our customers who have an accent we're not used to hearing. And I might remind you, we all have accents, even those of us who speak English, or we come across unfamiliar names or use unfamiliar terms, or they use unfamiliar terms. So without careful listening, customers can feel unimportant and misunderstood. Now here's just a little fun fact. The human brain sometimes works against a person's ability to listen. When people speak, they talk at about 125 words per minute, yet we're capable of hearing and understanding 300 words per minute, okay? Further, people actually think at the rate of 600 words per minute, right? So sometimes our brain is all the way in a different place, and we think we're still listening to the person in front of us, and we've already moved on in our thoughts. So the challenge for us is to stay focused on our customer and truly listen, and try not to fill in the surplus of thinking time over listening time. And then finally, the fifth universal need is delivering value. So school employees need to deliver value by fully meeting their customers' needs with a product or service that the customer deems valuable. It's all about exceeding your customer's expectations and delighting your customer. So imagine, for example, if a Spanish-speaking mom arrives at one of your school buildings and wants to register her 2 children for school and is met with a front office staff person who is too busy to even recognize that the mom is there needing assistance. She might stand there for a while waiting for someone to help her, or she might walk out the door feeling humiliated and frustrated, okay? This happens a lot in our schools. But imagine, conversely, a true culturally competent scenario with the same mom. She enters the school, is greeted immediately with a hello and hola, and after the front office staff understands that her English language skills are limited, she's presented with a registration packet that is completely in Spanish and with a phone number that will be answered by a Spanish speaker to make sure she understands and completes the registration process. Now, just reflect on how those customer experiences are so different. And I know that the one that you are resonating with is the one where we serve the mom who speaks Spanish extraordinarily well. So in speaking about limited English speakers, Spanish speakers and otherwise, because we have a multitude of languages in our districts, here's just a few tips, and feel free to share these with your front office staff. Think about these as maybe have some training for your central office staff as well. So give the customer your full attention, right? Be comfortable with silence and long pauses as this person collects their thoughts. Imagine you're being in a country where you do not speak the language. Imagine the difficulty you would have. Be patient and try and concentrate on what's being said and not on the customer's accent or perhaps wrong choice of words because they're struggling to find the correct words in English. So when waiting for a response, pause longer to allow the other person to answer, give them time, and allow them to finish their sentences and avoid filling in the blank for them because it may not be the word they're searching for. And here's a hard one. Don't pretend to understand if you really don't understand, because if your discomfort level is high, you just may want this whole experience to end. You think you know what they want. You're super busy, but again, don't pretend to understand if you really don't. There is some technology called a language line that is out there that you can explore that are essentially on-call interpreters that has worked well for us in a previous district where I worked. And there might be other services out there as well, so you might want to investigate that. Be prepared to write or draw pictures to understand what the person is saying. And of course, try not to use those idiomatic expressions that like the hot potato, or do you want to sign up for the whole kit and caboodle? And then ultimately be prepared to feel uncomfortable because, it's where we are. It's the space that we sometimes find ourselves in. But even if you're not successful in completely understanding your customer, I guarantee your customer will appreciate the time and genuine effort that you have taken to try to understand. So getting started on your cultural competency journey, I mean, what might that look like? So I encourage you to use these activities from this webinar to begin to raise awareness and conversation about these issues. You might want to create a book circle with a selected resource to learn more about cultural competency. And one I really like and can recommend is called Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott. It is a terrific book about having courageous conversations. Fierce does not mean angry in this use. It means having courageous conversations. She's got a lot of great pointers and examples of how you can begin to do that. And of course, infuse cultural competency training throughout your district. You have to make sure everyone at every level understands what it means to be culturally competent and be aware of their own biases to make sure that they're delivering the best in customer service. And then you can survey your customers, your families, your key stakeholders in determining the level of your schools and central offices welcoming environment, or you can use secret shoppers to also do that. So I love this quote from Bill Nye, the Science Guy, and forgive me, I'm going to have to read this to you again because this is so important as we wrap up this webinar. He says researchers have proven scientifically that humans are all one people. The color of our ancestors' skin and ultimately my skin and your skin is a consequence of ultraviolet light, of latitude and climate. Despite our recent sad conflicts here in the US, there really is no such thing scientifically as race. We are one species. Each of us is much more alike than we are different. We all came from Africa. We're all made of the same stardust. We're all going to live and die on the same planet, a pale blue dot in the vastness of space. We have to work together. So I invite you to reflect on what you learned here today and how you may apply it to what's happening in your district, in your town, in your country, and even the world, because it's only through understanding and respect and the affirmation of our worth as humans, no matter what our culture, language, class, sexual orientation, or religion, can we move forward. I believe this is not just a nice to have. I believe it's really our moral imperative and truly our civil rights issue for this century. And I think you are exactly the people who can influence change in your school districts because you understand this deep notion about how to serve customers, communications, and cultural competency. So I also want to say thank you again to Peach Jar for allowing me to spend time with you today and share some information and on a topic that I'm very, very passionate about. And I also want to just say that Hunter Communications offers cultural competency training and customer service training. I team up with a terrific company called 3D Ed, and if you so need customer service training or cultural competency training, please feel free to contact me. So I'm going to turn it over to Ria, and we might have some questions that we might be able to answer.
Yes, thanks so much, Barbara. That was really great. So much good information in there. And yeah, now we're opening up to Q&A. If you click on the questions box in your GoToWebinar field, you can type in a question there for us. Okay, so first question. You mentioned various distances to keep depending on cultures. Which one do you think is the most appropriate space as a catch-all for all cultures?
Can you repeat that, Ria? Can you say that again?
Yes. You mentioned various different space differences that people would keep between one another when speaking. What would you recommend is a good amount of space as a catch-all for all cultures?
Oh my, that's a great question. You know, I think that is something that I'm not sure I have an answer to because I think when we think about different cultures, some may want to, as the example, some may like to get close. You may want to share with that person, that individual person, rather than defining a certain space, like 2 feet. You may just want to say, pardon me, let me just back up here. I just need some space here, and treat it individually. And I think if you explain that you just need a little bit more space, for example, if the person is coming too close, rather than defining a certain area to maintain around your body, I think that's probably a much better approach.
Okay, thank you. Next question. We have more than 40 languages spoken at home in our school district. Most, other than English, is Spanish. If we translate to Spanish and not Arabic or languages spoken less at home, will individuals from these other regions take offense?
That is a huge concern. I think a lot of school communicators share. I've been to districts throughout the country, some in Spanish, heavily Spanish-speaking districts, which still don't have a standard process for translations. This is a commitment I think that you need to embrace. Generally, what I have seen as a best practice is to identify the top languages that are spoken in your district, and it may be 3 or 4, could be half a dozen if you're a much larger district, and ensure that those critical pieces of information are translated in those languages. I believe that school districts absolutely need to dedicate resources to ensuring that their parents who may not speak English well are communicated with, because otherwise we are forming a 2-tier power structure. Those people with information, generally English speakers, and those people without information, generally non-English speakers. This is not where we want our families to be. Another strategy that has worked well is to have identify someone at the school building, a parent liaison, or someone in the front office who speaks the native language, a majority native language in your district, and so you have someone on hand to when you need those conversations. But I do urge you to dedicate additional resources to translation. It's just critical that we do that.
Thank you. What was the name of the translation tool you recommended, and do you have any others that you recommend?
Okay, so I've used Language Line. It's called Language Line, and I'm sure you can find it out there if you Google it. I imagine there are other sources, and it's really literally in our district we picked up the phone, and then when someone came in and was struggling with English, we determined what language they spoke, and literally you can call this service and request an immediate translator, and you hand the phone over to your customer, and they explain in their native language what they want, need, and literally it's a real-time conversation. So yeah, I highly recommend that as a backup.
Very neat. That sounds like a great tool. Are there any other questions from the audience? All right, well, that concludes today's webinar on cultural competency. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much again, Barbara. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.